I asked Steve Howard and Vince Saluzzi from the Beaumont State Employees Association to see if we could hear from actual employees in the field who are dealing with some of these issues and also get their feelings about raise the age. So I guess first is Trissy Casanova, who I've met before. She's been in the State House several times talking about this. But our goal here is to figure out a way to get 19-year-olds under DCF custody. The Columbia Lab project indicated good success and actually a decrease in the number of 18-year-olds who are who were in corrections has decreased dramatically because only the Big 12 are headed corrections now, and the kids, I've forgotten the percentage, but a huge percentage are diverted. So, Tracy, if you'd like to comment on the proposal, raise the age goes into effect this July 1st if we do nothing.
So thank you so much.
Please feel free to have a seat or stand or whatever you'd like.
I'm gonna actually just introduce myself and then introduce my colleagues, and I'm gonna have them go first because you guys have heard from me a lot this.
Okay, you can go in any order you want. There's three of them.
So I chair the labor management department, chair the labor management committee for DCF, and so I have Nikki Duran. She's a supervisor at the Burlington DCF office, newly promoted, and she's a juvenile services supervisor, and she was a juvenile services worker prior to that. And then Jason Conati out of the Bennington district, who's a family services worker, and formerly ran our SEAL programs. So we're going to start off with Nikki, go to Jason, then I'll close this up.
Great. Please feel free to have a seat. I think you met all three of us.
I did, thank you.
So I won't introduce.
Hi, everyone. As Tracy said, my name is Nikki Duran, and I'm a juvenile services supervisor in the Family Services Division for DCF. I am based in the Burlington District office, but I live in Franklin County in St. Albans. And I prepared something today to read for you all from my perspective in this role. So I, as Tracy also said, I supervise the juvenile services team and previously was a worker on this team for nearly 4.5 years. The Burlington District office has 5 identified juvenile services workers, and collectively our team currently holds 88 cases. These 88 cases are made up of CHINS C youth, which are youth deemed to be beyond parental control, CHINS D youth, which are youth experiencing truancy or engaging in delinquent behaviors, youthful offenders, and at times, due to the needs of the office, child protection cases. If raised age were to be implemented as planned, this is the team that would absorb these cases in Chittenden County, which would continue to raise our caseloads and be detrimental to our quality of work with youth and families. When workers are overburdened, the ones who suffer most are the youth and families we serve. Due to our team of juvenile services workers having to support multiple case types, some of which we are the legal guardians for, the over 18-year-olds often get less case management support than would be ideal, due to the impossible task of workers to triage all of the things they are responsible for to ensure child safety. If these youth were able to have access to more consistent case management time than what we are able to offer, which is likely primarily once a month face-to-face contact and follow-up with collateral contacts, it would be reasonable to think that we would see less recidivism and better outcomes for these youth. However, without additional resources, either in the community without sole DCF oversight, it is of my personal opinion that this would not be possible to manage effectively. It would not increase positive outcomes for the youth 18 and above. Throughout my last 5 years at DCF, I have seen an evolution of need within the juvenile services population and a depletion in the services we need to serve them. This includes resources for stabilization and treatment in a residential setting. Looking at the dashboards of the workers I supervise, 14 of these youth have concerns for accessing firearms illegally, and many more have concerns for accessing weapons, aggression and violence in the community, and significant substance misuse. Currently, the state of Vermont does not have specific programming to target concerns for firearm violence, a resource desperately needed to address the safety issues in our communities, and many times the community resources we typically access to support these youth and families decline providing services due to the risk to staff. This leaves youth who desperately need support, connection, and treatment in their same environment without the resources they need to make a change. In previous sessions, you have heard from other DCF representatives about the shortcomings of our current high-end system of care. And in hopes to not be repetitive to what you've already heard, I hope to give an anecdote about how those issues impact real youth and families in our community. Due to our juvenile justice system and child protection system being intertwined, it is impossible not to hold the impact that this issue has on our community as a whole. And it is my belief that it has an impact on the case management skill and treatment that would be provided to the incoming raised age population. Within the last month, we learned that a youth who had been considered for and denied from multiple out-of-state residential treatment facilities would need to leave the short-term stabilization placement he was in due to another youth needing the placement. We were left with the unfortunate choice to do what we could to make them the safest in the community. This led to the youth needing to be staffed in our office because they would be too at risk unsupervised and to not yet have a school plan. This downtime without having the opportunity to thoughtfully engage in treatment and their education was a detriment to the youth's progress. I share this anecdote to demonstrate that when our system is failing, the ones most negatively impacted are the youth and families we serve. I could share more stories like this, and the position that I'm in as a supervisor is supporting the workers on my team with doing the best they can for the youth and families they serve, and all of us needing to reconcile with the unfortunate reality that because of the position our system of care is in, from the lack of a locked stabilization treatment facility to community-based agencies unable to safely support families who need it most, it isn't enough to do the work our community needs to be safe. Many of us and many of you do what we do to make a difference. And while I philosophically believe in the Raise the Age initiative, due to my experience as a direct service worker supporting these youth, I do worry that if we don't press pause while critical resources are being put into place, we will unintentionally do more harm than good to our community. I appreciate your willingness to consider my testimony, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. And maybe I do have some questions. I don't know if I should wait until all three of you and then any of you can answer the questions, or what would be the most comfortable for all of you to hear from Jason next and then ask questions.
I think if you could hear from all three of us first and then ask questions, would that work?
That's fine. Whatever works. Just to give you a heads up, we're meeting next Wednesday with the commissioner, and I want to know what's in the FY25 budget to do Raise the Age. I don't think there's anything. And so when you mentioned resources, that's one of my questions. If you don't have resources, how can you do it? And then you say, well, can't do it because I don't have the resources. Well, if you don't put money in the budget, you can't have the resources. Anyhow, so is Jason next?
Yes.
Jason made the drive up from Bennington. More power to you. I think we met years ago.
Multiple times.
Multiple times over the years. You worked where I used to work.
The building that now has your name on it.
Well, it does now, yeah. Used to be spoken in vain many times in the early days.
Some of the people that were there in those early days are a lot older than I am now. So
You know, it's funny. I ran into a video one. I've had some shoulder problems, and I ran into Julio Massonet at the doctor's office, and he's in a swing, and I said, "Oh God, we make that there." But small town.
It's a very small town, Senator, and actually, one of your first residents that you ever worked with went on not only to turn his life around, but became a mentor to me and really made me dedicate my life to the work that I'm in.
Thank you.
So, you know, that all started with you and your vision for CL. Good morning, Chairman Sears, Senators. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today. I am Jason Connedy. I've been employed with the department for the past 3 years. Despite my short time with DCF, I've had the privilege of serving the youth of Vermont for over 25 years. More than 20 of those were working in private residential treatment, with my last position has been noted, running the Depot program in Bennington before coming over to the state. As a family service worker, I carry a JS, Juvenile Services caseload. As Mr. Rand outlined, these are all court-involved cases that I carry and include delinquencies, probation cases, youthful offender, amongst others. The question being discussed about raise the age has a direct impact on the work that I do and the youth and families that I serve every single day. This morning I'm not coming to you to represent the views of the department or our division. I'm just speaking to you as somebody who's dedicated basically my entire adult life to the youth in Vermont. So let me begin by stating that, I understand the science about brain development and where Raise the Age has come from, and that the goals of Raise the Age are important. And I think these goals can be accomplished here in Vermont and done successfully. In the question of whether to temporarily pause the next step of Raise the Age, or what we're speaking about here this morning, the current climate that my colleagues and I are facing in the course of our jobs every day is that we are stretched beyond the breaking point for the last several years. Our family service workers are faced with the task of staffing youth when there are no beds available, putting both our staff and, more importantly, the youth that we serve at risk. Countless hours during our workday and after hours, weekends. We're staffing youth in police stations, emergency rooms, district offices, other locations in Brattleboro, in Bennington, and around the state. But this is taken away from our primary job, which is the casework of working with the youth that we're assigned to and the families. As Mr. Rand described, the youth that we're serving today and the behaviors that we're seeing are significantly more dangerous now than ever before. As a JS worker, the youth served by Raise the Age will be the responsibility of workers like myself and my colleagues that manage these types of caseload. And with all due respect to the report that is mentioned frequently about our caseloads not being impacted, I can't disagree more. In Bennington, we have slots for 15 family service workers. 5 of those manage investigations and assessment. 7 handle child protection family support cases, which leaves 3 of us to manage JS cases. Since October, we've only had 2 because we had somebody leave the department. That position has not been filled yet. Best practice would show the ideal caseload for a family service worker is 15, 16 in that ballpark. Consistently, my caseload has been in the mid upper 20s and over 30 for multiple months. This just does not allow for effective casework. We have to triage every single decision that we make in the course of the day. We're just not providing the service that our kids deserve. In addition to the lack of beds, a crisis that we've been facing since COVID, the infrastructure of community supports, especially in southern Vermont, is just not adequate to meet the needs that we have right now, much less with youth coming in under Raise the Age. Our barge providers, designated mental health agencies, and other community agencies are stretched just as much as we are. Southern Vermont, as we all know, is the primary conduit for the drugs, weapons, and increased gang activity that is coming into Vermont. And the impact of this on our communities has been devastating. Senator Hashim, Windham County, similar to Bennington County, we both have access to the locations where we are staffing these youth. Sheriff Anderson has been a huge partner for our department, and as someone who's done countless hours of these staffings, definitely appreciate his leadership in that area. And I don't want to imagine where we would be without him. In Southern Vermont, our youth often face a wait list of over 4 months to get medicated, to get medication management from our designated mental health agency.
Excuse me, 4 months to get from UCF?
Absolutely.
They tell us there's no wait list.
I would disagree with that.
You're talking about Suboxone, methadone, and
no, I'm talking about mental health.
Mental health treatment.
Correct. And medication management for mental health.
Medication for mental health. Okay.
Youth that desperately need clinical support are forced to make.
I think they were meaning there was no waiting list for drug treatment.
The youth that we need to get clinical support are often have to make do with what is referred to as therapeutic case management because there's a lack of mental health counselors in our community. Our barge providers do amazing work, but they lack the capacity to really meet effectively the current needs, much less anticipating a higher caseload. And Senator Sears, you mentioned substance abuse. The resources we have to treat these issues at the community level is really just not there. A recent YO case that I managed involved a young person, age 20, who had just committed their second DUI. As part of juvenile probation, a standard condition would be they access local mental health, undergo a substance abuse screen, and follow all recommended treatment recommendations. This young person, who is not even legal drinking age, was told as a result of this assessment to drink more water, eat healthier, exercise, and report to your probation officer as directed. I had to stand and report this to the court. We don't have substance abuse treatment for youth in our community. And as far as inpatient, that just simply doesn't exist for children in Vermont. I'm not advocating for this committee to repeal or stop raise the age. My hope is that Vermont will commit to putting in place the resources and infrastructure that we need to do it right. Our youth deserve no less. My colleagues and I in the Family Service Division will always answer the call to support the youth and families that we serve, and we have been doing so despite the massive challenges that we face day in and day out. But we are at the breaking point, and we ask for your support so that we can provide the level of service that our families need. And this would include implementation of Raise the Age. The dedication and commitment that I witness every single day from my colleagues is something that every Vermonter should be proud of. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done. Tracy?
Good morning. Again, my name is Tracy Casanova. I am the chair of the Labor Management Committee. I've been an employee of DCF Family Services. This is my 21st year. I started my career up in the St. Albans District offices as a juvenile services worker under Trish Brett. And I was a child protection worker, and then I ended my career up there as an investigator that was co-located at the Northwest Unit for Special Investigations. I currently serve in the role as the Deputy Compact Administrator on our interstate programs, and I'm the Human Trafficking Consultant for our division. As a social worker, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a former juvenile services worker. I wholeheartedly believe in the Raise the Age initiative and the science behind it. I also believe in the planning for the implementation. When you're planning for an implementation of a new initiative, you need to make sure that there's a proper infrastructure in place to handle it. Any change to our systems, such as ours, should include consideration for readiness and capacity. Otherwise, the initiatives will have unintended consequences and will fail or detract from our mission and other mandatory statutes. And this is not an initiative that we want to fail. This is an initiative that we were behind and we want it to be successful. If the Raise the Age initiative is implemented now, the population who would most negatively be impacted is going to be the youth who we're trying to help. In fact, we may be creating more harm. Right now, the high-end system of care is on fire, and you can't have a fire. And when you have a fire, you need to put it out first, then you rebuild, and then you add on. You can't make additions to the house while it's still on fire and burning down. As employees, we are just as frustrated that for almost 4 years after the closure of Woodside, that we still lack a secure crisis stabilization program. In this time, we've experienced a diminished capacity in our residential programs and within our community-based programs and wraparound supports. As Jason mentioned, we have 0 inpatient residential drug treatment for adolescents. So any youth who needs residential substance abuse treatment, they need to go out of state. And even getting a substance abuse assessment for a youth is really difficult to come by. These are programs that are meant to support children and families in their homes and communities to provide treatment, reduce risk, and help alleviate the need for a higher level of care or entry into our systems. Our DCF system is unique that we're both Juvenile Justice Agency and the Child State Protection Agency. Since we are responsible for both entities need to explore the issue of capacity before any new initiatives are implemented, as any will have an impact. Any changes on one will have an impact on the other. It has been reported that the Raise the Age initiative won't have a significant impact on our caseloads. That information is misleading and would only be accurate if this was the only population that we are serving. Many of our districts are small, and most of the family services workers carry a mixed caseload. Their juvenile services cases generally include teenagers who are in the custody of child abuse or neglect beyond the control of their caregiver, truancy, or delinquency. This is why the numbers need to be looked at in a holistic manner. Our current state of crisis and lack of options for juvenile justice involved youth impacts the other kids in our care. So for example, when we have a juvenile justice youth involved who has more acute needs or is a danger to the community, they're going to get prioritized for a stabilization bed, which means another child who's holding that bed, who might not be a JJ involved youth, is going to be disrupted. And that what that means for that child is that they're going to be likely staffed with us by our staff at a variety of one of our numerous locations. And this is going to
quiet sign out there, please. Thank you, Beth.
And that's going to have a negative impact on our kids. And in fact, when we do this, it's making our kids worse because because of this rotation of staff that we're doing with these kids. The kids that we're seeing is different from when I was a JS worker in St. Albans in terms of the behaviors, their acuity, and the presenting challenges. Okay. And we're also seeing an increase in number of kids with developmental needs that would be served by developmental services who are part of our high-end system of care, who are native placement and specialized services. We also have a high number of kids involved in gangs. And I know that people don't like to use that language, but we do in fact have gangs in Vermont, and it is in fact a pretty serious problem. The Bennington Banner recently published a really nice article that articulated the gang problem that we are seeing within Vermont. Okay. These kids, in addition to being involved in gangs, are committing crimes involving weapons, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. While it's frequently a lot of speculation that it's only out-of-state kids or out-of-state people who are committing these crimes, I'm here to tell you today that it is also our Vermont kids who are also engaging in these types of delinquent acts. Okay, and we do not have the system in place to be able to address their needs and keep everybody safe. These kids are incredibly difficult to find placement for because of their level of aggression or the types of delinquent acts that they're engaging in. So our lack of resources within our system has multiple impacts. So the youth who are too dangerous to be staffed in our staff secure programs or too dangerous to be staffed with our workers, they're sent back to their communities and to their homes. So then their families and the community, they are at risk. When we staff young people with the rotation of our staff, who I want to just add, we are not residential treatment providers. We are not residential counselors. So when we have this rotation of staff constantly for kids, we're making them worse because we're unable to provide them with consistency, structure, services, treatment, education.
I'm sure I understand what the rotation of staff is. You mean sitting with kids?
Yes, so usually about 2 workers with 1 youth at a location for maybe 4 to 6 hours at a time, then a new set of workers comes in.
Okay.
Over.
So they're just supervising.
Correct.
To make sure.
We're doing basic safety, and that is it. And so they're not getting any clinical work. There's no peer community engagement, and these are things that they deserve and need in order to stabilize. So the number of kids per year that we're staffing continues to be on the rise. So in 2023, we had 126 incidences where we were staffing kids, and that's an increase from 2022 when we had 63 instances of staffings. We are staffing kids as young as 6 and as old as 17, and I have some detailed charts that show data for a data breakdown regarding that. And again, I want to emphasize the whole system. And with this increase of the kids who need developmental services who are entering our system, part of our high-end system of care, we've seen an increase in assaults on our staff from that specific population. So between November 5th of 2023 to January 22nd, we staffed 4 kids in that period of time who are DS kids. And there was a minimum of 17 assaults on our staff in that period of time. And that's a minimum because there's one of those child who was assaulting staff, multiple staff daily while they were being staffed within a district office. This lack of high-end system of care impacts the quality of the work that our staff will be able to provide, because when our FSWs are staffing youth during business hours, they're not able to do their regular daily work. So then it gets pushed off to other workers to try to fill those gaps or needs to be rescheduled. And there are things that can't be rescheduled, like court hearings, emergency removals. This means that workers can't engage with families in a meaningful way, in which we know leads to better outcomes for kids and families. When family services workers are staffing youth after hours, they're pulled away from their families and their personal life, and they don't experience time to rejuvenate from the stress of highly emotional work that they have to go to and do the next day and carry on their daily tasks. Many of these overnights require staff to stay awake, or if sleep is permitted, one can imagine it's not a good night's rest. All of this is leading to burnout, emotional drain, high rates of turnover, low rates of retention, and continual safety concerns for our staff. Why would staff stay within family services if they can move to a different job that has no stress, no after-hours requirements, all while maintaining their rate of pay and benefits? We are struggling to keep people in their positions, coupled with the demands of hiring, onboarding, and becoming knowledgeable in the work. On average, it takes about 2 years for a family services worker to fully understand and know all of the job responsibilities that come along with being a family services worker, because we are such a complicated system. Our high level of turnover within our staff significantly impacts the experience and outcomes for kids, youth, and families that we serve. Based on this, we're not ready to implement Raise the Age right now. And until our high-end system of care is stabilized, we cannot take on any new initiatives that are barely hanging on in order to just meet our basic mandates. If we implement this now, there will be a lot of unintended consequences, starting with the youth and the communities that we're trying to serve. Secondly, it could have a knee-jerk reaction and unintended consequences where some would say it failed and it was never going to work and would want to lower the age, which would be a travesty. Okay. In order for this to raise the age to succeed, we need to hit the pause button now for implementation and implement it when the system can manage it. And right now is just not the time.
I will say we hit the pause button for 2 years. This is the 3rd year request to hit the pause button. So, I mean, that's part of the frustration of this committee. There's a lot that the 3 of you have talked about. What strikes me is how we would put together benchmarks. Given the response of the commissioner, hopefully will tell us what is in the budget for FY25 to implement Raise the Age. And if there's nothing, then the administration didn't plan to implement it. Plain and simple. But there are 2 things that you said that struck me. One was the acuity of the kids, and we're trying to figure that out. I mean, I know I spent time down on Depot Street with the directors there, some of the staff, and they're reporting extremely difficult kids being placed there. And they're also reporting many kids with developmental disabilities who probably shouldn't be in the DCF system any more than they should be in the correction system when they become adults. And yet we're seeing a remarkable number of these kids and adults in both the corrections, and now you're reporting DCF. I don't understand how this is happening. We're supposed to have a separate department, Dale, to take care of it. So I think that needs further exploration by both this committee and perhaps Health and Welfare in the Senate anyway. But if you have copies of your testimony, that would be helpful to share with Senator Lyons, who chairs that committee. But I just am taken back by, I've talked to people like Jim Henry down at Depot, and he's reporting a number of kids with developmental disabilities that they're seeing. So they're going home if there's no room in the inn?
Correct. If they're too dangerous to be staffed, and Depot, they can say no. They don't feel like that they can manage the youth, that they're not a good match for their program. And so if the Depot says no, and they're too dangerous for us to staff them, then they're being sent back home. And so in terms of like DCF and probably Department of Corrections are the two only agencies that cannot say no. We don't have the ability when a judge orders a kid into our custody to say, I'm sorry, we're full, or I'm sorry, we don't have the capacity to meet that child's needs. We are required statutorily to be responsible for them because we are their parent. And so a lot of these DS kids that we're talking about, there are no, those community-based services, they're not there anymore like they used to be in order to support those kids. And so when those services aren't there in order to stabilize kids within their homes and communities, things continue to spiral out of control. Families don't have the supports that they need, and they end up in our care.
So it's the developmentally disabled child acts out delinquently, let's say. And so then the court charges him or her as a delinquent, and then you end up with him. Is that how this works? Or is it as a child in need of supervision? Which?
A variety of both. So we're seeing a lot of younger children so they're not coming in as necessarily delinquents, under 12, who are coming in with presenting with developmental services or on the autism spectrum, who have a variety of needs, have a history of violence and aggression, have personal care needs to attend to, like hygiene and toileting, and so that their caregivers can no longer provide care for them based on their acuity in the home.
Even if we have which we desperately need, a high-end place like former Woodside, it won't answer that problem. It won't address the problem of kids who are under 12 or who are not delinquent, not acting out delinquently.
There's not going to be one solution that's going to be the thing that fixes it all. There has to be multiple solutions.
Well, I probably should ask the commissioner, but do you know if the department is thinking about this group?
Yes.
They are?
Yes. We are, I believe that there was prior testimony that we are working to develop a PRTF program here in Vermont. And I know that because of our high numbers of kids who are entering our care for developmental services, I believe that we are working to try to figure out programming for them since Dale's unable to. So, but the leadership would be best able to speak to those.
I know there's gonna be a 15-bed psychiatric facility at the retreat, and I believe a psychiatric facility in Bennington at the hospital, eventually, if they get all the proper paperwork, which should help with this, particularly with the mentally ill. I haven't heard anything about developmental disabled, other than complaints from workers and employees at places like Seattle who are trying to deal with these kids that they're not really equipped to deal with, frankly.
Right.
Can I speak to that, Senator?
Yeah, please do.
I was running that program at the time where we really saw the massive increase in DS kids coming in, and it became really dangerous when Woodside was closed, which I think we all agreed was the correct move, but there was no replacement in place. So now we're taking kids with these developmental disabilities and we're mixing them in a stabilization program with pretty significant delinquent youth, older youth. And during that time period, Mr. Henry could corroborate what I'm saying, the number of physical restraints skyrocketed.
Yes, they have. And then we have the office of the child advocate coming down on the program for the number of restraints.
And the staff just aren't, these are residential staff, they were not short-term stabilization, they're not trained to deal with that kind of youth with these developmentally disabled kids.
The problem is you can't be all things to all people, and the department asks people to be all things to all people.
Correct.
That was my problem for 40 years when I worked there. Send me a good old delinquent who wants to break into my house and beat up my wife, steal my car. That I can deal with.
That's a memorable quote.
Those are the kids I learned to deal with.
You're absolutely right. Those youth typically they're much more at an appropriate developmental age.
Yeah.
And typically they are easier youth to work with. They understand the consequences.
Well,
They can
as long as you put limits on them, they're easier.
So,
But yeah, I agree. That's the type of kid that I used to work with. We used to call them drunken brawlers.
it became unfortunate when we started mixing younger developmental disabled
I
kids
think-
with those, and the
I think
results
so.
for those kids were tragic.
Again, you know, just as a social worker can't be all things to all people, you're trained and you're skilled in certain groups. Programs can't be all things to all people, and yet that's what we're asking both our Department of Corrections and our DCF staff to do. And I think that's a basic problem. But as we come in next week and ask the commissioner, so what are the benchmarks we should look at for you to implement raise the age to the 19-year-olds? Are there anything that you would see as significant benchmarks that would make you feel you're better able to handle that group?
I think first and foremost, we need a secure crisis stabilization program for kids to be at to stabilize. Because what that will, if you're looking at even just the JJ population, it's going to remove some of the pressure valve. It's not the whole solution because we need multiple interventions and multiple programs to meet different populations' needs, but it's gonna create that pressure valve release a little bit that we desperately need. So we need a program that is not run by us, that is not run by our staff. So we need more than a building to start with. So I think a building that is run by another organization that is not by family services worker staff would be, I think, the first and foremost benchmark, a place for these kids to go to start receiving treatment, because then that is going to alleviate the beds that are truly intended, the stabilization beds for the population that was intended to serve, as well as there needs to be services, some sort of service and programming for those DS kids as well. And then I would look at the community-based programs, because we are a state that really values keeping kids in their families and in their communities. And we currently can't do that because the designated agencies and our community partners, like, they're at a diminished capacity and we can't do this alone. And so, as Jason mentioned, like the waiting list, that's not unique to UCS. In my 13 years in Franklin County, and last year I volunteered to take some of their investigations because they were short staffed. Like, those waiting lists at Northwest through NCSS are just as significant as they were before. And so this is a trend across the state, the waiting list for services and people not being able to provide services. So we need substance abuse treatment for kids along with mental health treatment. So those would be some of the things that I would be looking at on the barge contracts, because those are really important for the juvenile justice population. So those would be some of the things that I would be looking at before, as to know when we might be ready to take on a new initiative. I don't know if you guys have any other ideas.
I would just echo everything that Tracy said. I think that when you, as a worker and or a supervisor, when you are dealing with a youth that is not safe enough to be in the community, but that is the reality based on our system of care, that takes up much more time than I think anyone can imagine to manage as safely as possible. And so something that would alleviate that pressure for workers would allow them to engage thoughtfully with the over 18 youth. So I agree with that.
So even though a 19-year-old would not be eligible for the crisis stabilization program, having a secure crisis stabilization program would free up enough for you to be able to handle this 19-year-old who might need high end.
Because right now the staff are spending their time having to staff kids during the daytime versus engaging the kids and families on their caseloads. So they're not going to be able to get to those 19-year-olds and engage them in a meaningful manner to have an impact of what you're hoping for. Because the kids who are going to get the priority are the kids who are in custody, who are in crisis, who are in need of staffing because we are their parent and we are responsible for them. So that's where when we're triaging, that's where it's going to go.
So we should be looking at, one is crisis stabilization, two is basically community supports. three is the bridge, which is another community support, but that funding would probably, I would guess most of the 18 and 19-year-olds, not necessarily behavior reasons, but would be probably in large type programs, diversion and so forth, so you need that capacity for that. And then, I guess, the one thing I knew it was happening, but it's shocking, was the developmental disabilities angle that you've raised this morning for us, that the degree with which it is a problem, I thought it was just two or three people having a problem, but it's system-wide.
When Jason was in his former role, in my interstate role, I'm responsible for the out-of-state runaways and the return back to their home states. And we had a youth who had was picked up for some drug trafficking of some significant amounts of fentanyl. And because we didn't have Woodside available to place that would fall under the ICJ compact to hold and detain before returning home, we begged. And Jason said yes to allowing this youth
Yeah, I remember the staff being upset
to depot. I can tell you that the mixing of the populations, it impacted that kid from the other state. Like, I haven't had a kid so willing to like sign a return to go home, where he was going back to detention as quickly because he was so freaked out. Like, he was so uncomfortable about like these younger kids being there and engaging in the behaviors that they were engaging in. So like the mixing of populations is also, they're impacting the kids in their milieu as well.
Not to date ourselves, it's kind of serious, but,
well, I've dated all the time.
When I was first getting into this field, Vermont had a significant number of residential beds available, specifically for boys as well, which just don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
They've been dwindling over the years to where more and more kids are going out of state, which then doesn't allow families to engage in the treatment process.
Somebody got a brilliant idea that residential treatment was bad.
That's unfortunate.
Well, somebody got that idea and sold it. So we lost most of that residential capacity. Yes, there were abuses. Yes, there was problems. But I really appreciate all three of you and Steve and Vince for putting this together, particularly Steve. What about Vince?
He's taking pictures.
Vince is a former member of the Senate, longtime member of the Senate, former member of the committee. So we've learned not to give him much credit because he gets carried away.
Because of run with it.
But anyway, are there other questions for our three panelists? It's been extremely enlightening, and in light of next Wednesday's testimony from the commissioner, but I'm not sure what to do about developmentally disabled kids are not being done any favors by being dealt with by the wrong department. And that's problematic for me, because I know in corrections they're not necessarily kids, but these individuals are being taken advantage of by other inmates, and I'm pretty sure in the DCF system probably they are as well. Oh, I know one other question. You mentioned kids going home. There was a high-profile case for the kid, I think he's 14 years old, charged with murder, ended up going home.
I can't speak to the specific
Individual,
cases.
okay. Yeah, but that's true, right?
Yes, it was determined that there was no legal way to hold them in corrections without being in 24/7 solitary confinement. And so the child was sent home.
I can tell you anecdotally, in my role as Deputy Compact Administrator for our ICJ program, is that we have out-of-state kids that I've had to go in and recommend to judges to hold kids without bail and incarcerate them because they are a risk to the community and we had no other alternative, and they would be too dangerous for our staff to be staffing. And as a social worker, I hate that I have to go in there, that is the only option that I have to advocate for, is for a kid to be incarcerated, because that means that they're gonna be in isolation. And the alternative was I was FaceTiming that youth while they were incarcerated on a daily basis, where he was skimming the walls, because he didn't have interaction with other people. And that really causes additional harm as well, on that youth. Regardless of, like, he engaged in dangerous behavior and he was an absolute risk and he needed to be in a safe place. And like, there was harm being done to him as well as a result of our lack of options. And that's not okay. I know that there's been questions regarding like our data regarding delinquencies. And I think all of you have seen the report the department filed on December 1st with the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. And so we have copies here for all of you that has numbers, because I know that that's something that is probably helpful for you guys. So.
Thank you. Other questions for the three panelists?
I guess, Senator,
Or
just
comments
to
that you'd like to make?
add to the question about youth going home and not speaking to specifics, but oftentimes because of the need to triage the acuity across the state, when, you know, as workers and supervisors, we get a call that a youth that has been in short-term crisis stabilization needs to leave because the bed is needed for a youth that has higher needs in that moment. And so we are tasked with finding a place safe enough in the community for them to go. And when we're not able to find a foster home to be able to meet that need, oftentimes we are relying on family members to take that youth back. And I think what we have seen is that when youth leave crisis stabilization too early, they might do well for a little while, but they are back in their environment, and it leads to things like youth running away from their homes or continuing to engage in the behaviors that led them to that placement initially. And I think just going back, the folks that really impacts is those youth that are once again returned to the community because our system is failing them and they are put in a position where they're not able to make better decisions for themselves yet.
And some of these homes that we're sending them back to, like, they are barely, some of them I can say like they're safe enough, but they're with question marks in our minds at times.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Thank the three of you so much. Appreciate
Seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Putting together this panel. It's been remarkably helpful to us to put a different perspective on the question of how do we raise the age. You were gonna train us in using the scan system.
Can I take a recess and come back and have an important phone call?
So, well, let us know when you're ready to train us in using the scan
Okay, you got
on
it.
our phones.
Thank you
Some
very
of us
much.
do know how to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I
Thank
think
you.
it's a volunteer to teach, right?
Can I come back and talk about the big 100 later?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we're gonna talk about it now. You wanna stay around
I
and
don't
talk
think so.
about your 100 crimes.
I just want to disassociate us with anything you might say from here on out.
So there's an amendment and then another handout underneath.
This is all for us?
This is S58.
Okay.
But paper clipped on top is the amendment and then underneath is a handout from Eric going over.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
before we move on from that, I just wanted to say, I would be willing to back a delay until April or as you've contemplated, if the commissioner was willing to come in and say, we're committed to doing this by next year and here are the resources we need. But they are definitely not saying that. No one has said that they support the policy. So I can't help but think it's a shell game, and that one factor alone makes me lean toward not giving them the delay they want, because they're not being honest, I don't think.
Not saying anything in the 25 budget specifically.
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, when you ask the commissioner specifically in approach, what things in your ask are related to being prepared for raise the age, he really thought about it and he kind of fumbled, and clearly that's not a part of their thinking. So I feel like at the end of the day, we're either gonna have to force them to budget for it this year, or, in order to get the delay, or force them by not giving them the delay.
And that's why I'm asking too about benchmarks.
Yeah.
That one would need to put in place and have justice oversight or some other group, keep an eye on meeting those benchmarks.
Right, but if they're not
But if they're
stating
not,
a commitment to it,
Right. they're
then,
not really committed to it, even though they say they are.
right, or I just see them refusing to say, because I think the implicit message is, we don't support this policy, we're not ready for it, and we're not gonna prepare for it. So I don't know where to go with the commissioner from there.
I'm looking forward to next Wednesday and listening to the commissioner.
Mhm.
I asked him to come in here and during obviously what Senator Baruch just reported is an accurate summary of our conversation and approach. And he was unable to identify, other than the secure facility.
He mentioned barge funding, I think.
Barge, he didn't mention.
Right, but only after being pressed a couple of times, and there's no plan to put it bluntly. So,
Well, then, if you can just keep asking for a delay and it works every time, you don't have to plan. I mean, it's worked every other time.
fair enough.
Twice. The first time was, right after COVID. I thought that was more than reasonable.
Yeah.
Anyway, what we're looking at here is an amendment that I worked on and Eric drafted to S58 on raise the age. Excuse me, the Big 12, excuse me. I'm still stuck with raise the age. And by the way, I think raise the age, if we do anything, should probably go into S58. And leave S209 as just the ghost gun. Now, people can vote up or down on whether they want to support a ghost gun. I guess if you support the bill, it would no longer be a ghost gun because it would be serialized.
Well, it's preventing ghost guns.
Well,
Right, because the ghost gun, if it gets a serial number, is no longer a ghost.
Right.
so is it now raised from the dead?
That's sort of. And Eric, if you would go through my amendment,
Yes.
or if you want me to do it?
Either way, I can highlight it and then you can pick it up, Senator Cruz, whatever works for you.
Basically, this is an amendment listening to members of the committee that may not satisfy the whole committee, but might satisfy half the committee. What it does is makes no changes other than the number 12, the Big 12. The intent is to change that to a currently occupied building. So it's clear that breaking and entering is into an occupied building. For the new crimes that would be added to the Big 12, the use of firearm while committing a felony, trafficking a regulated drug, or aggravated stalking, that would apply only to 16 and 17-year-olds, not to 14 and 15-year-olds. And my thinking behind that is there was some discussion of how could we start 14 and 15-year-olds in juvenile court and then have them raise up. And there is a process for that. While it's rather cumbersome, it could be improved. That's what this proposal is. And most of the complaints I've had are about 16 and 17-year-olds on these three crimes. I dropped human trafficking because once you started the exemption for victims, it became clear that you probably don't have many that aren't victims at that age.
I still don't like burglary into an occupied dwelling.
Well, yeah, but it's currently occupied.
I still think it's
Well,
different.
We can talk about that separately. You wanna explain further?
I think you summed it up,
Yeah,
Senator
all right,
Sears.
missed something.
Right, no, you didn't. There's, like you said, there are two changes between this and the previous version of the language. One is struck human trafficking from the list of, it originally had 4 offenses to add to the Big 12. This one only has 3 because it does not add human trafficking the way the original language did. And ordinarily, when you're talking about Big 12 offenses, it's offenses that start in the criminal division when it's committed by someone 14 and up. This doesn't apply to 14 and up. If you look at line 8, it's only 16 and up. So the 14 and 15s would continue to start in the family division. So those are the two differences, I think. The other thing I would add, we don't have to talk about it now necessarily, but this has come up now in 3 different bills, so I thought it was going to be helpful for the committee to think about this related concept in line 13 of possession, carrying, and use of a firearm, because that's now, related to this bill, it's related to the ghost guns bill, and it's related to Ben's bill, which I'm not sure the number is off the top of my head, that he's been working with you on, is also using the word use. So if you look at the chart.
The bail.
Bail, thank you very much.
F-195
Right.
is where somebody, for the purposes of bail, it would be considered a violent act.
Right, but, and there's some talk about, again, the word using,
Right.
So I looked into this this week. You'll see the handy dandy chart that you can use, because as I say, it's in 3 different bills, so you can think about it, but if you sort of think about it as a continuum, the word possess sweeps in the most conduct. The word use sweeps in the least conduct, and carry is kind of in the middle. So that's sort of the continuum that you're on. So there's even a couple of examples that you see on the chart, because one of those examples, possession, having a firearm in the trunk of your car while you're carrying a substantial amount of drugs for a drug transaction, actually came up in a US Supreme Court case that was looking at the word use. And the court said, no, use requires active employment of the firearm, and that makes it an operative factor in relation to the underlying offense. And if you just have it in the trunk, you're not using it. As opposed to carry, that would apply. Possession also would. When you're, and then if you're talking about an unrelated offense, like DUI, say, you've got a firearm in the trunk. Well, in that case, you're still possessing the firearm, but you're not carrying it or using it. So if you look at that chart, that might help you decide which term you want to use.
That's an interesting conundrum, isn't it?
It's very interesting. The courts have talked about these terms are different, but then they said sometimes they overlap. For example, in the Supreme Court case, the Justice O'Connor specifically said a firearm can be used without being carried, and it can be carried without being used. So it can be used without being carried, for example, when you have it on display during a transaction. Remember, Senator Sears, that was kind of your example. You put it on the table. Mm-hmm. You're using it because you're trying to influence the people involved in the transaction.
There's no brandishing.
Actually, you're right. They did say brandishing in the course of the opinion. They said brandishing counts. Use includes brandishing, displaying, bartering, striking with, firing or attempting to fire, as well as making reference to the firearm in the defendant's possession. Does not include mere placement of a firearm for protection at or near the site of a drug crime or its proceeds or paraphernalia, nor the nearby concealment of a gun to be at the ready for imminent confrontation.
So carry, possesses, carry probably is what we're looking at, right?
It's a policy call.
I mean, I'm looking at, no, the firearm has no connection to the DUI.
Correct.
I think that was one example that was used in committee.
Right.
Persons arrested for DUI, there's a firearm in the trunk. Well,
that would still get you under the word possess, but you're right, under carry it wouldn't, because carrying has to have a connection to the offense.
Well, there the distinction is that the offense is DUI versus a drug deal.
That's right.
Because if the firearm is in the same place, it's the difference in the kind of offense, not where it is.
That's right.
If the drugs are in the front seat, the firearm's in the trunk.
Yeah, but if it's a drug deal, that counts.
Probably so. Because of the standard being
Yeah.
the potential for facilitating the commission of the underlying felony.
I guess. Yeah. Carrie?
Well, we should be consistent in all three bills this year.
Sometimes you do just want possession, like, for example, possession of a high-capacity magazine. Remember, in those
Right.
cases, you just wanted possession. And so it really does, it depends on the context. This year, I think you're right, Senator Sears, the bills you're talking about seem related enough that maybe you want to use the same terminology, but it is a policy call. Interesting, though, the court case is talking about this difference in wording because there are differences in there.
So it has carrying firearm. The commission of felony requires that the firearm be within easy reach.
Yep.
Or in a defendant's car, or easy reach. And two, have the potential of facilitating the commission of the underlying felony, which could be drug trafficking, could be kidnapping, whatever.
So,
It has to be that
Even if it
connection.
wasn't actually used in the underlying
Right.
felony.
That's right.
it could have been.
So we use carry instead of use. Or possess. Possess seems to be everything gets involved, even things that we don't intend to have involved.
It is the broadest, yes. That could cover a situation where potentially you have the firearm upstairs and you're in a gun safe or something, potentially.
Yeah. And use is, I think like carry is in the middle. You put it
Yes.
in the middle because it's in
I did, that's kind of the continuum, right?
But-
Exactly.
use is pretty, no, definitely did not actively employ the firearm, even though they had a substantial amount of unlawful drugs in the front street. See,
Yeah. That was interesting because that was the specific fact pattern of the case. That was what the
But-
court was deciding.
I got a little confused. You can use without carrying, you can carry without using. In your instance where someone puts it on the table, they are using it, but not carrying it.
That's right. In fact, that's exactly what Justice O'Connor said. She used that exact example.
Yeah, so that would not capture the concern that Senator Sears had about someone who brandishes it on the table, but is in fact not carrying it.
Well, they would, in that case, the carrying, because of its connection to the firearm, and let's assume the table was within easy reach, then it would cover both. But I think she said, it's interesting because the opinion said, and this is displaying, use includes brandishing, displaying, bartering, striking with, firing or attempting to, et cetera, et cetera. So those aren't very relevant to the example you're bringing up. But to me, that's what I thought, noticed the same thing. Displaying does seem to be that sort of a situation.
Yeah.
So use covers that. Perfect, okay.
Yes.
so if, I would like to be consistent in all three bills.
Well, I think use is what covers what we've been talking about and is the most cautious use of the new authority. So, and that's what you have in the amendment already.
So they're not using it if it's in the trunk.
Right.
They're not using it to have a DUI and
Right.
things in the trunk. They're done.
But they are using it if they're threatening
So
with
it's
it on the
okay
table.
for me to have my gun in the trunk and drink and drive.
Well, I mean, I would say
Not
it's probably
okay.
not okay for you to be drinking and driving.
Still an offense there.
But I will only get charged with DUI, not with
Right.
a crime of carrying a firearm.
Senator Sears, off topic, but I just got a question from the secretary wondering if you're doing confirmations today.
Am I doing confirmations today?
Yes, you're
Think I can handle it?
I think so, I think you should be.
Okay, well, Ben and I are gonna do the confirmation.
Do you wanna do mine too?
Well, I forgot you have one too. Are you ready?
I can be ready, yeah.
Yeah, I can do it. I'll get one. You get me the folder? Yep, I'm ready to go. And,
Because it is Friday.
huh?
It is Friday, traditional confirmation day,
Yeah, this is a leftover from Jeanette White.
that we do them on Fridays.
Yeah.
That's a nice use of that time, because Friday's always a little special as a session.
This is gonna be extremely special. I'm getting the hell out of here today. I think I've got Senator Bruce cold.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
Are you also gonna be Batman?
Only for one day, back to me.
So, any thoughts on so we gotta make decisions on raise the age, carrying a firearm, 3 different bills. So everybody likes use better.
Yes.
So it's all the same in all 3 bills. You just let Ben know what we're.
Yes, I will, definitely.
Asterisk for
Bail.
Senator Norris.
I like the use, but looking at it from a law enforcement standpoint, I'm kind of looking at, the guy driving down, or girl, driving down the road, observant amount of drugs in their front seat, just happens to have a firearm or 2 in the trunk, he may not be using it at that moment, but it's there for a reason, is all I'm thinking of. But I'm sure that everyone else will go along with use from the firearm owners versus carry. But from a law enforcement standpoint, I guess it's preventative versus, but I can go along with use, yeah.
It helps to know the underlying offense in the criminal code is carry. You're only talking about narrowing it somewhat for certain purposes, i.e. Big 12.
Right.
Or so the person might still be charged with the underlying offense, because in statute, 12, 13 VSA, whatever it is,
It's scary.
it's carry. Exactly. So it will be broader for that, just narrower for 3 situations we're talking
Big
about.
12 for bail
Bail,
consideration.
yeah.
For, what's the 3rd bill?
Ghost guns, right,
Non-serialized firearms.
right.
Once they're serialized, I think they become zombie guns. I've decided.
Then they're just guns.
Reversing a federal
Yes,
law
exactly.
covers
Serialized and background
firearm
check.
while
So
selling
I
or dispensing of drugs.
Oh, yeah,
Anyway.
Use or
Use.
carry.
Okay.
Yes.
It's
And that's
interesting.
that law that the Supreme Court was interpreting in that case. I was reading.
Reported in the banner,
But it could be.
the guy got
for
caught with
use
it
or-
because the officer
Just want to make sure we.
patting him down. He said, "You have no right to search me." He said, "I'm looking."
Feds can get it.
Not searching.
The feds can get it. And so can the state, because carry.
I thought that was a
underlying
great
crime.
line by the
It's
cop.
just
I'm
whether
not
it's
searching,
bumped
I'm
up
looking
to
at
Big 12 or-
I don't know what the difference is.
Well, it sounded good at the time.
Sounded good at the time, and then a ghost gun falls out with 18
How did the ages change again in this?
bullets in the
Yeah.
trigger.
It's on line 8 and,
On line 8 on
the
page 1,
page 2, actually.
page 2, okay.
Anyhow, we'll, so Eric, is there a general
16 or over.
Big 12
Even
go
if
to
Big 12 is
58?
14. But for these 3
Raise
offenses,
the age,
it
go to
would cover
58,
14.
we do
I-
raise the
It
age.
would only be the
My
16
only
and over, so it would go to
asterisk
7.
is I still don't like, I understand it's in the Big 12 now, the burglary into an occupied dwelling. Are you still looking to make the change to that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I believe that would be in our final amendment. It would change it to currently occupied. That was my intent.
Because that one still doesn't fit with the rest to me.
No,
So it doesn't.
but if it's currently occupied, it's a pretty dangerous thing to go into somebody's home if it's currently occupied.
True enough, but when we've been through this before, it just doesn't seem to me
Well,
like.
if you wanted to propose, we voted on it as a committee, we can vote on it at the time we mark up the bill.
I would welcome a vote on whether to include that.
The whole thing.
That offense. burglary into an occupied dwelling. Whether that was part of the,
Well, there were seven,
now it's gonna be the big 14?
there were only 17, as I saw I don't know where the heck I could find the document. Ben got information from that group, the crime researcher. It's rarely used.
Which is an argument in my mind not to have it in there.
Well, you can use it either way.
I mean, in other words, you're saying it doesn't matter that much because it's not used, but I don't see a need for it if it's rarely used. But anyway,
Well,
that's
then
all.
I continue to think we should eliminate the Big 12 entirely.
So you would be behind eliminating any piece?
Absolutely be behind eliminating any piece, and I think if we are gonna keep it, we should raise the age for everything to 16. So we have these 3 new crimes that
That was designed to help you.
well, I think the whole thing should be 16. If we're acknowledging that in some of these spaces, 14 and 15-year-olds are too young to be charged as adults, I would argue that in all of those cases, I mean, and again, I continue to think that decisive action should be taken in any instance when a child when a choice is going to be made for a child to be charged as an adult, which is why I advocate for eliminating the Big 12 altogether and telling state's attorneys that if you are making the decision to charge a child as an adult, you have to make that court filing.
Now we have to make it easier to move the case up.
I would be willing to have that conversation if we were eliminating the Big 12.
We only have 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
But I understand your concern, but I guess my concern would be definition of what occupied dwelling. You're concerned about the kids on the way home from the football field or whatever else, and looking into a camp and going in. But what about the one instance where, if it's not there, what about the one instance where it does apply?
You mean where somebody's sleeping in a bedroom and they hear a noise and they come out and someone's robbing them?
What about that one instance?
Yeah.
Does that person deserve protection from the law?
But am I right that in our discussion, the people don't have to be home for it to be an occupied dwelling?
Under current, that's why the proposal is to make it currently occupied, exactly.
Okay, so I just feel like if the underlying offense is burglary, not, assault or threatening or criminal threatening or something like that. So I take that to mean that the only thing that the person did was break in, and then either they were caught or scared away or something. So they didn't commit an additional offense. And they're 14 years old. I can't see at that point treating them as an adult for that crime, I guess. And it's, to me, it's just of a different order than committing a felony while using a firearm or trafficking drugs or aggravated stalking or arson or,
Murder.
Right. When I think of, kid stuff, kid crimes, what comes to my mind is stuff that, happened in my neighborhood with kids that I knew from school. They got caught breaking into people's houses for, stealing, just for the thrill of doing it, I guess. And so treating those folks as adults in the same way we would a 14-year-old who committed murder just seems apples and oranges to me.
And I agree with that, but not every kid carries a baseball glove and chews both of them. Okay, not every 14-year-old kid. Okay, so there are those exceptions.
Who are criminalized young people. Yeah.
Gangs.
Well,
we heard it today.
And I think that's the whole thinking behind this is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, but I think the whole thinking is that there's been a move by older operatives to use younger people because they're not, because they're going to go into family court. And so I get that, but I think we're sweeping up young people who aren't in that situation. And so for me, it's a balancing act, and the one that doesn't make sense to me is the burglary.
But still, they have to prove intent even on burglary, right?
Intent to burglarize.
Right.
You have to commit one of those other fences besides going into somebody's house.
No, that's just burglary.
I think it's just entering the occupied dwelling.
That's not a trespass. That's not a lawful trespass.
It could also be a
Burglary.
trespass, but it might be, I wanna double check on that. You might be right, there has to be an intent
Be
to commit
intent.
underlying felony of some kind.
Intent to commit murder or something?
No intent to commit the burglary.
Intent to commit
I'm gonna-
assault while you're in
Yeah.
there, or you're gonna steal something, or.
Yeah, no, I'm admitting to the burglary, I'm admitting to the
Do
intent.
you have the numbers?
Like, the kid is there to steal stuff, but does,
Could you just
should a
read them off?
14-year-old be treated as an?
I can't find them in my pile.
I mean, like you know, I will script anything else, but I continue to worry about the collateral consequences and the data we've heard that those collateral consequences actually make you more likely to further engage in violent crime, not less likely. And so from just a strict public safety standpoint, I don't think putting more youth into the adult system makes sense. And if we're talking about the policy in front of us, I mean, 14 years old is really young
Right, well, now we're talking about 16.
for
used to be
just the new
12.
ones.
Yeah.
Not the underlying ones. And so
Right,
one
not
of the
the
things I was saying is I think that we should change like for even the underlying ones should be raised to 16.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think we have time to change the system at this point to allow for an easier transition up. And so I'm trying to come to some consensus. I don't mind in certain cases where 14-year-olds are charged in adult court, because I know the system itself is designed, and we just heard testimony. Hopefully we have a secure facility case shortly for both long-term and short-term placement, and that secure facility would have an MOU to be able to take care of 14, 15, 16, 20-year-olds. Senator Ashin.
I was gonna note from what I recall, the Attorney General's, or Deputy Attorney General's testimony is that one of the main reasons for having somebody first start in criminal court is the public accountability piece, which I understand if it's for murder or, aggravated sexual assault, but going back to the teenager who's breaking into a house, steal some booze, it's not on the same level of murder where the community is going to want to see, what's happening with.
Ben has put the numbers up there. I think the 14 is the year, by the way, not the numbers.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So if you can,
Right, so this to me just proves my point. Why is it in there in the first place?
well, because in Orleans County, they had one, and Bennington, they had two in
But
2017.
I think that's.
Do you have the other years there?
it seems like what we're saying is with certain offenses, there's a pressing need.
That's over the course of 5 years. So it's over the course of 5 years, 2 17-year-olds broke into an occupied dwelling.
That was in 1917.
No, it
No,
Is there
charges
more
filed and
there?
disposed
No, this is the
between
only-
2018.
that's all
I think those are the ages.
Mm-hmm.
I think the
Yeah.
county refers, the number on top is
Okay,
the
so
age.
there's three 17-year-olds. Okay, thank you, Ben, thank you.
Yeah.
no, it's,
I appreciate you reading it. So there's one 14-year-old over that 5-year period, one 15-year-old, two 16-year-olds, and three 17-year-olds have been charged.
So we could put burglary into an occupied dwelling under the 16-year-olds. So eliminate your 14 and 15-year-old clause, then put human trafficking or trafficking back in.
I just don't think the burglary one belongs there.
I'm just trying to compromise.
I know you are.
It cost me something, I'm just trying to compromise.
Well, I think I sense the majority
For
is
which,
in favor of removing number 12.
and that's burglary into an occupied dwelling. That would, I would vote for it.
Would you also, a majority, vote for the addition of the 3 crimes. For 16 to 17-year-olds, do we have 3 votes? I'm voting for that.
I like it,
Obviously, it's my amendment.
I like it better without that and with the 16 years. Yes.
I'll vote no against the, first discussion, and I'll vote yes to support this amendment. Just to put that on record.
So Eric, if you'd prepare to raise the age.
Wait, not in,
Yeah, no,
Yeah, he shook his head yes. He
oh, I
was-
see.
He didn't want to be vocal for the record.
yes, my answer is yes.
Okay.
And you're a no.
That is correct.
All right, so Eric, if you would prepare the amendment that strikes number 12, even though I'm opposed to that.
Times 2.
That's 3-2. Doesn't matter. Let's strike number 12 and add number, a new number 12 and a 13 and a 14. But the 13, 14, and 15, or 13, I shouldn't number them. The breaking into, the carrying a firearm.
Using,
Using a firearm.
Right.
Thank you for that correction.
sure.
Using a firearm. Drug trafficking, aggravated stalking would apply to 16 and 17-year-olds.
So in other words, this amendment, but just strike.
And 18, would it be 18-year-olds too? Because
Yes.
we've already raised the age.
Yes,
there.
exactly.
Would apply to 16, 17, and 18.
Right.
And then the, further amendment, would be on raise the age, which is to be coming. And is Ben doing that?
I'm working on it, but I, if you can put it in whatever,
So the direction, that would go into 58 as well, and the
Right.
direction that I would like to follow, just so you can start thinking about drafting, would be that there are monthly reports to the Joint Justice Oversight Committee on attaining certain benchmarks. One would be a crisis stabilization program, 2 would be long-term treatment, 3 would be designated agencies having the ability to not have waiting lists for mental health, large contracts, acuity. There will probably be others in the discussion. And also, obviously, money in the 25 budget to accomplish the goal of having raised the age to effective, say, April 1st. Senator O'Shea.
Just a quick, I know we have 5 minutes until the next thing and we probably want to take a break, but will we eventually be talking about section 3 of this bill? Because I still have some questions about the change for, as it relates to the permissive inference and proximate cause and what will or will not be a defense.
Drug with death result.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we really haven't discussed this other than Jay yesterday. Brought it up. Don't, I think where we're settled is probably in sections 1 and 2.
Yeah.
There's obviously, I think that's pretty well said.
That's
The fentanyl, so. And then we have to still talk about the rental eviction. I think we pretty well covered the eviction based on criminal activity of people that don't live there or aren't part of the lease, but we really haven't covered the leaseholder, but I think Senator Norris did a great job of explaining that to the witness yesterday.
And then the intent would be to vote after we hear from Commissioner Williams.
Yes, but raise the age in here.
You know, and I agree with everything, you know, we're trying to do in here with raise the age and whatever else, but I take more, and not to make this political, I take more from the boots on the ground as to them saying, you can go ahead and do it, but we're not gonna be able to help these children, so we're saying, well, let's do it anyways, and I agree with, we need to find some stable housing, whatever else, and then let's do it.
Right.
How do we
and-
get there? I mean,
And that's the missing link is, I personally need to hear the commissioner say that he supports on behalf of his agency or his department, he supports the policy and has a plan to implement it by the date. Otherwise, I'm not gonna vote to delay it, and it'll go into effect, and we'll be in a world of his making, as far as I'm concerned.
these would be to include the children, as you put it, these people suffering from the DCF.
Well, I mean, I think if it's going to be implemented, they will scramble around and find the money. But right now, they're making it clear they're not only not gonna scramble, they're not gonna use 3 years of preparation time. I don't think they're any closer to it than they were 2 years ago, because they don't wanna do it, I believe. If I'm wrong, they can say so, and they can show us the funding that they need. And I don't think that's a lot to ask for something that's already law. We're just processing their request about whether to change the law in their favor. And we've done it twice. So I think coming clean with appropriations that they need and what their actual stance is on the law is not a lot to ask.
Well, this is what he said. He said, last week, a reporter pointed out that some legislators want to call our bluff on raise the age and move forward despite DCF testimony that they don't have the resources. So let me be clear, we're not bluffing and pushing something through to prove a point. We're under-resourcing a department or expecting us to produce workers who simply don't exist.
Right, but
I don't think we're
That
suggesting
avoids-
under-resourcing at all.
that completely avoids the question. That's smoke and mirrors.
I just read,
Yeah.
I'm only reading what the governor said.
That's exactly what I'm pointing to, is they keep making statements that purport to answer the question, but don't. In other words, they're saying, we do not have the resources right now. And we're saying, we get it, but tell us how you're gonna get the resources, or are you gonna say next year that you don't have them? And they don't wanna answer that question. And so I'm not gonna delay it without that answer and that commitment. Because otherwise, if their point of view is that they don't wanna do it, they think it's bad policy and they're not gonna prepare for it, then we have a standoff and, a micro constitutional crisis where law calls for them to do something and they're not gonna do it.
Yeah, at least you're not sending the fleet over the Pacific and challenging Congress to bring them back.
But this will be a different thing
Well,
altogether.
but I think that's where Wednesday's testimony with the commissioner becomes so important,
Yeah.
is to elicit, what is the plan? Because if there is no plan, then why bother asking for another delay? And what you want is a delay until you can get this stuff done. What is it you need to do? You don't want to, actually, you don't want a date for a delay. They've never said they wanted a date for a delay. They
Right.
want a delay until they can get this done. And what is it you need to do?
Yeah,
And why haven't you done it? I think that's the question.
absolutely.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I wasn't here back when this all transpired, but when, I think it was the Shumlin administration and you folks were here, when you shut down Woodside, which I'm not saying it was the right or wrong thing to do, that's not what I'm saying. Was there a plan B at that time, or you just went ahead and did it?
Yes.
They told us that they had.
Yeah,
They meaning who, the Shumlin administration?
No, this was Scott.
Scott administration.
What happened was there was so much negative behavior going on at Woodside among staff.
Yeah, I'm fully aware of that.
I'm more attuned to the director, who was not competent in teaching staff proper restraint. They should have had somebody else doing it, but be that as it may. So Ken Schatz and Mike Smith was secretary of the agency at the time. Ken Schatz was commissioner in DCF. A number of us met in the governor's office. What do we do with Woodside? So we decided to close it down. The idea was they were going to build a long-term facility in Newbury, and they were gonna use the Sununu Center in New Hampshire, short-term. That was like Plan B. What either they didn't know or transpired and they did know, I don't know. But Sununu was under their own fire for behavior staff at Sununu, and the Governor Sununu decided to close the Sununu Center. So once he made that decision, those kids couldn't go there and we were stuck with nothing. And then the Newbury facility, the town itself filed suit in court, which held that process up. And the state until this year didn't really look for an alternative. But that's why we're at where we are at.
But the Vermont Supreme Court ruled on Newbury, right?
Yeah, they did, but then just recently, the DCF and the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services announced that they weren't gonna consider Newbury for a secure facility, but rather some adjunct type of facility for a different group. And that they were going to place something permanent in South Burlington or in Virgins. And that they were going to have the temporary facility open in, I believe it's Middlesex. And that temporary facility is, I believe, almost ready to go, but they don't have a private nonprofit provider who's willing to step in and run it. That's what I do know right now. So it's been 4 years, and that's all the history I have. I'm sure there's anybody else knows.
That's very helpful. I just wondered about Plan B there, and I guess there was one, it fell apart, and now they're almost.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't blame the administration for thinking that Sununu would be a viable alternative. The other thing they didn't realize was how long it was gonna take to get a kid to go out of state, because there's a certain process that you have to go through. And I thought they thought they could do it immediately, and they found out there's a court process. It takes about a week to get the kid to go to Sununu, but now that's no longer an option anyway.
So I guess one of the questions should be to the commissioner next Wednesday is, when do you anticipate finding this private firm to come in, provider to get this up and
Well,
running?
even the state employees who usually oppose private providers are saying they want a private provider. So that was unusual.
Because I'm looking at the people who were in here this morning.
It's funny you say that. I hadn't thought of that before. Now, that's the first time I've ever heard VSEA. She stressed an organization other than us. We want it to be
Well, that
private.
doesn't necessarily mean a private provider. An organization other than us might mean a different department under the
But
Agency
then
of
she
Human
was
Services,
saying,
not DCF.
Well, I
Then
think
she was saying private.
I think they don't want to run, the employees also have learned during this process, they don't want to be involved in that type of facility.
Right.
Maybe we have
Usually the
something
state
to
employees
consider.
are fighting any privatization.
Well, I remember when the Woodside closing thing came, they really opposed it. They wanted to revamp the facility and have more workers.
Well, and the lack of appetite to do that type of work, I think, should give us pause about what type of work we're asking people to do.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
certainly remember when I was in Finland and one of my American counterparts kept asking this woman at a facility that served children, what you do with the kids that you can't serve here? And when she finally realized what the American student was asking was, what do you do with kids that need to be in jail? The woman was horrified and responded by saying, what is wrong with you? We do not put children in jail. So I think we need to just really think about what we're doing if nobody wants to do it.
That's not the reason. Nobody wants to go to Middlesex.
Middlesex isn't so bad.
Well, you haven't talked to Jim Henry. He doesn't want to go to Middlesex. Where am I gonna get police?
We moving right into it, we taking a.
We're gonna take a 5-minute break till 1:15, and we need to hear from Mr. Perro, the owner of Perro's Guns, and talk a little bit about